first of all, I have to thank you just to come and talk with me.
Thank you very much. It's my pleasure.
It was really nice. So, Aaron Gilman, could you give me a little overview of your career?
Sure. Well, my name is Aaron Gilman. I'm currently an animation supervisor at Weta Digital in New Zealand. I've been living there for 7 years working with Weta. I've been a creature animator for 15 years. I started in 2000 in a studio here in Montreal called Meteor Studios. I graduated from the Vancouver Film School in their 3D animation program. I spent the early part of my career working in television. I was animating dinosaurs for the Discovery Channel, and then eventually I moved to San Francisco to work at Tippett Studio, where I began my feature film career. I started with The Matrix Revolutions, the third one, and then went on to Hellboy and Constantine. And then eventually came back to Montreal to work at Ubisoft in games, and that was my first experience in the gaming industry. And I didn't love it that much, so I decided to make the transition back to film. And eventually, long story short, I decided to move down to New Zealand to work on Avatar. And I was on Avatar for about 1.5 years as a senior animator. Then I moved on to Tintin, where I was a lead animator and eventually became a sequence supervisor on the big finale battle at the end of the film. And then I went on to supervise Avengers. I've worked on the 3 Hobbit films and have supervised the 3rd Hobbit film, the one that just released. And I've also had amazing opportunities to supervise other films, Iron Man 3 and Godzilla. I'm currently the animation supervisor on the next Alvin and the Chipmunks movie. And I've also been a senior animator on the Planet of the Apes films.
So basically all small projects.
Small independent projects, you know, $1 million budgets. Yeah, but Weta has treated me well, and it's the best company I've ever worked for. It's very much like family.
I know your duties are a little different for this project, Alvin and the Chipmunks. So, as an animation supervisor, what are your duties?
Sure. Well, my main responsibility as an animation supervisor is really to be a creative conduit between the animation team and the client. So I work with the director and I work with the senior visual effects supervisor at Weta, and I communicate the creative vision that they have and that I have to the animation team. So my day-to-day process is really to work with animators one-on-one and to develop the performances that they're putting into each shot. And then, after we show those performances to the director and we get notes back, my job is to synthesize those notes into a very clear concept for the animators so that they're very focused on what it is we need to change in order to make the shot successful.
Do you still animate a little, or?
I animate whenever I can. When I'm on smaller shows, I definitely get a chance to animate. When I'm on larger shows, like, for example, the 3rd Hobbit film, it was pretty much impossible to animate because the volume of work is so huge that when you have animation teams that are 60 or 70 plus animators, you're just not going to have the time because you need to be communicating with those animators all the time.
Working with 70 animators, I mean, everybody has their own styles in a way.
Yeah.
How do you manage all the talents to make sure they attain the vision and the style that is established for the film?
Just to clarify and to be fair, when we have teams of animators that are in that range, like 70 plus, we actually break up the show. So I'll have a co-supervisor. In the case of The Hobbit, we had 2 other supervisors besides myself because we delivered well over 1,000 shots for that film. So one person can't possibly do all that. And so we strategically break up the show into parts that make sense to have divisions in. And then each animation supervisor will take that section and they will have a team of animators that they work with. But in terms of different styles of animators, at a studio like Weta, the animators are very capable. We have a lot of very talented people that have a lot of experience in the industry. And so we don't, at least I don't, try to control the way an animator works. I allow them to develop the work the way that they're comfortable with, whether it's acting out their performances before they animate, or some of them are more comfortable drawing. However they choose to build their workflow is up to them. when there are problems in their animation that are due to their workflow, then I'll step in and I'll basically, help guide them to change their workflow in a way that will make the animation better. But generally, we let them work the way that they want, as long as they're delivering their shots on time, they're showing their work regularly for review, and they're able, most importantly, to adapt to the notes that they're being given. Then, that's the most important thing.
And you, as an animation supervisor, how do you adapt to the different directors you've worked with, naming only James Cameron, Peter Jackson, Steven Spielberg, just to name a few?
Right. That's a very good question. Every director has a personality, and every director has a certain way of wanting to work and wanting to develop the vision of the shots. Some directors know exactly what they want, and they don't want anything to be changed going into the process. So as long as we commit to exactly what they have designed, there won't be any problems. They'll be happy when we show it back to them. Other directors prefer to work a little bit more organically, so they're more comfortable giving feedback based on what they're actually seeing at the CG level. And so they'll give feedback and they'll talk about what they think works in the process and what doesn't, and then we'll take it back again and we'll redesign elements of it and then show it, and then there will be another process of notes, and then we'll redevelop it and show it, and they'll like to work more organically like that. Some directors are just super enthusiastic about animation, and so their comments will be very specific to animation, whereas other directors don't necessarily have as much of an eye for the animation. They trust us to develop that work on our own, but they have more interest in the lighting and the look and the general integration of the rendered elements into the shot. So everybody's different. The most important aspect of my job is to make sure that there's an enormous amount of positive energy in the critiquing process with the animators. The animators need to be, I don't want to say the word protected necessarily, but you want to make sure that the animation team is always moving forward with as much of a smile on their face as they can, that they're putting their passion and their soul into the work. And so my job is to essentially support them in their strengths and expose their weaknesses so that they can make those better. That's really the relationship. Somebody asked me, one of the ways that I imagine the relationship of an animation supervisor to an animator. And one of the ways that I imagine it is, think of them as, that relationship is kind of like superheroes. If you get a superhero and his sidekick. In this particular case, I'm the sidekick. I'm not the main hero. The animator is the main hero. And my role, even though I am technically the authority on their work and I can offer that they make changes where we need to make changes, in the end, the creativity of the performance comes from them. So my job as the sidekick is just to keep them out of danger, just to direct them down the right path. But ultimately, they're the ones that are defining the performance. And so we have to trust them and then really just kind of guide them wherever those obstacles pop up.
Talking about obstacles, what was the greatest obstacle in your career?
Well, there have been many. There's one in particular that comes to mind, which is the work that we did on Iron Man 3. Iron Man 3 was a very complicated show for us because there was one specific thing we needed to achieve in a very short period of time. So we did a huge number of shots in only 3.5 months. But in those shots, we needed to design the way that the individual Iron Man suits at the end of the movie, when the 32 suits arrive for the giant battle at the end. There are a number of moments in the film where Robert Downey, Tony Stark, will jump in and out of suits. So he'll be in a suit and it'll get damaged, and then it opens and he jumps out, and then he lands in the next suit, and then it closes. And these were suits that nobody really had thought about how these suits are going to open and close around his body and what his live action performance was doing in the shots. So we needed, in a very short period of time, to build a whole suite of tools that the animators could use on a shot-per-shot basis to be able to cut up the different pieces of geometry of the suit and then open and close them and animate them around the body of the performance in the shot. And this was complicated because it needed to be a creative enough process that they could adapt to changes on the fly in their shot without us having to go back to re-rigging the character, changing the entire setup of the model and how the model it has been designed. We needed to be able to essentially cut those pieces up just on the fly, take the animation from one side, mirror it to the other, cut on one side, mirror the cuts on the other. And so we built a whole list of tools that would allow the animators to do this in a very fluid way. I consider that to be our greatest achievement on that film, because if we hadn't developed those tools, I'm not sure that we would have completed the work as well as we did.
Well, you got a few award nominations, so you did a great job on that.
Thank you.
What about your proudest moment?
Proudest moment? Proudest moment. I don't know. I'd probably say my proudest moment was completing the third Hobbit film.
Yeah.
That to me was a very intense experience with an enormous amount of work that had to be done, but on a massive level. You know, like one of my roles, along with another animation supervisor, Mike Cousins, was to essentially design the Battle of the Five Armies, dealing with thousands upon thousands of characters, enormous amounts of motion capture, and there were times where it was just an incredibly complicated process, and on a scale of work, that was by far the biggest show that I've ever done. And so when we completed that project, probably when I went to the screening in Los Angeles and saw it for the first time on the big screen with the fans and the rest of the crew, I was incredibly satisfied and really proud with what Weta had achieved.
There's a debate in the animation world, keyframe versus mocap.
That debate's old.
It is old, but it seems to be, today I've heard people saying, oh, motion capture, it's almost cheating.
Cheating.
What's your take on it?
Oh, I'll tell you my take on it. You know, motion capture is a tool, and it's the most efficient tool for what it is designed to do. If you're doing realistic humanoid performances, motion capture is going to give you not only really good results, but very fast. So it's a financial issue as well as a creative issue. Because if I have an animator design by keyframing a realistic human performance, it will take not even double the time, not even triple the time. It may be even more than that. Whereas I can go to a motion capture stage with the right actor and I can get that performance in 45 minutes. What we're talking about when we talk about animators wanting to do keyframe and wanting to do motion capture is the fact that animators don't like to deal with motion capture for a number of reasons. One, the performance has already been designed for them. So the creative aspect of designing a performance is missing from that process. Okay. Number two, you're dealing with enormous amounts of dense data, right? If you think about animation curves or F curves in Maya or whatever software you're using, once you get motion capture curves, everything is on ones, every single channel, rotations, translations, all of it is keyed. And so sifting through all of that data and adding changes to the motion capture that doesn't break it, most importantly, because motion capture can be broken very easily by an animator that it doesn't necessarily know what they're doing with it. It's very daunting, it's very tiring, because you have to deal with all of these curves, and one mistake can suddenly ruin the motion, and you may not even know why the motion has been ruined. So from a creative standpoint, I understand why keyframers don't want to play with mocap. From a professional standpoint, from somebody who needs to get the work done in an efficient way at a high level of quality, I think motion capture, for what it is used for, is the greatest tool there is.
But we still need animators to work with the data, change it if needed be, adapted to the show.
Well, here's an example, right? I have a project that I'm working on now where there's an enormous amount of squash and stretch and cartoony motion. And because Weta, does a lot of keyframe but also does a lot of motion capture, the moment we found out we were doing the show, I had animators in my office throughout the day for a week asking me, hey, is that going to be mocap? And I was like, well, no, of course not. You don't do these characters in mocap. These are squash and stretch, cartoony characters. This is going to be all keyframe. So of course, motion capture will never replace the keyframing art form. It's impossible, because motion capture is a tool used for a specific function, which is realistic humanoid performances. Wherever you're getting into other things like, animals, designs that are bizarre, whether they be tentacle monsters or, crazy creatures with 8 legs, of course motion capture isn't going to be the tool that you're going to use for that. You're going to need to design it by keyframing it. So the animators of the world simply need to know that it comes down to what is the best tool for the job. If it's motion capture, then that's what we need to be using. From a creative standpoint, sure, I get it. A keyframer isn't always going to want to have to deal with motion capture on a daily basis, and so that's where it comes down to the animation supervisor to make sure that you're changing it up a little bit. Maybe one day they're getting a shot with motion capture, and then the next day they're getting to do some keyframing. You want people to be happy, but the reality of motion capture will always be there. It's a great tool for what it does.
You've been in the industry for 15 years. How do you manage to keep the enthusiasm and remain creative in this industry? Because it can be tiring.
It can be very tiring, and the hours can be long. For me, personally, I like the challenge of every new show. Like, okay, here, look at it this way. Animation is hard. It's just hard, and it's like a giant puzzle piece or a puzzle every time you tackle it on a shot-per-shot basis. And so every new show represents a new challenge, right? Unless you're doing the same character show after show after show. Every new show has a whole unique series of problems that you need to work out. That's what I find, personally, that's what I find really challenging about the process. I know that whether it's the 20th show you've done or the 40th show you've done, the characters in that show in some way are going to be different than something you've done before. And so it represents a new challenge, a new creative challenge for you. Of course, working in the industry can be exhausting, and so you need to find things to keep your energy up, whether it's exercising or, I don't know, playing chess, public speaking competition, I don't know. But you need to do other things in life in order to keep yourself fresh in the job. But what I love about animation is that it's always hard. It's always a challenge, and every day is different. Yeah. Without a doubt.
Yeah. And is it the challenge that made you decide to do animation?
The reasons I got into animation are complicated. When I went to university, I had no idea what I was going to do with my life. And so I ended up doing a degree in just what seemed like enjoyable at the time. And so I did my degree in philosophy. Which is a strange one, right? Philosophy is great, and it's helped me, I guess, in certain ways, not necessarily directly with animating, but it's helped me with problem solving. And obviously, as you know, in the visual effects industry, all you do is problem solve and try and work through issues to, get the best look out of something. But I did my degree in philosophy, and then I spent many years trying to figure out what I was going to do. And so I was like a shoe salesman for ladies' shoes, and I worked in a video store, as a clerk for years. I was like an assistant wedding photographer, and I spent a long time trying to figure it all out. But what I had always had was a deep interest in visual arts. I wanted to be an actor for a long time. I was interested in photography, graphic design. I had done a lot of my own short films. And so I always had an interest in acting, visual arts, composition. And what happened was one day I met with my sister, Chloe Dussault, who's here at the conference. And she was working at a studio here in Montreal that doesn't exist anymore. And I went to go visit her, and I saw a guy modeling a dragon. And I was blown away by what I was seeing. And I was like, wait a minute, they're doing all this in the computer. And then I started thinking, oh my God, of course, Jurassic Park, that makes perfect sense. And then I went back to Vancouver, where I was living at the time, and I saw an advertisement for the Vancouver Film School. So I was 26 years old, you know. I took out a $20,000 bank loan, and I put myself into the Vancouver Film School, and after about 3 months, I knew animation was what I wanted to do. It had acting, it had directing, it had cinematography, it had all of the things that I had been interested in different ways throughout my life. And it just made sense. And so that's how it all started. It took a while. You know, I work with people that are a lot younger than me. But you know, we all come around to the same point at some point. So.
Yeah, and I think to be a good animator, you gotta live. You gotta experience life. Whatever is your way.
Yep, I totally agree.
And what advice would you give your younger self?
My younger self?
Yeah.
What advice would I give my younger self? That's a tough question. I'd probably say the best advice I'd give my younger self is to release my ego, to let it go. One of the things that is very difficult when you're an artist is learning how to stop being so protective of your work. Because when you're really protected, and this is in life, it's not just animation, it's in the relationships that we have with people. But when you hold on too tight, you create resistance. And animation and the visual effects industry in general is highly collaborative. And so that kind of resistance, I mean, you can have healthy resistance and a healthy ego, but you can also have an unhealthy ego that creates a lot of friction. And so I would probably say that when I was younger and starting in the industry, the best advice I could have gotten was, it's okay. The first thing you do in your animation shot isn't going to be the best thing. It's okay to let it go. It's okay to blow away all of your keys and start over with a new idea. And having that resistance negatively affects the work. Not only the working relationships that you have with people, but it actually negatively affects the animation because you're holding on so tight you're not willing to let it go. But sometimes you have to because it's a collaborative field.
Yeah, totally. Just to conclude, what is your mantra, your guideline?
I would say that my mantra is always be open.
Yeah.
And try not to let my ego cloud my judgment. As an animation supervisor, that's really important because if you're not listening to the animator and listening to their perception of what the performance should be, if you close yourself to them, then you've immediately severed the collaborative process, right? Like animators will work on a shot and they get tunnel vision. They stop seeing the forest from the trees. I think that's the expression. And they work on it and then suddenly somebody will come in and they'll go, oh, you know, what about this? And they'll go, oh my God, I didn't notice that, or I didn't think of that, or I didn't see that. And so animators, in order to do the best possible work, they need a sounding board, which is me. But if I'm a sounding board with an ego, and if I'm a sounding board that's closed, then I'm as guilty as they would be if they were too protective of their work. And so you've created friction in the process. So I think, to answer your question, the most important thing for me is to always stay open, always have dialogue, always have communication, whether it be internal dialogue or dialogue with the artist or dialogue with the director, and to not cloud the process with my own personal, you know, ego on the subject. And also not have an ego when it comes to interpersonal relationships. You know what I mean? My job is to remain as cool and, you know, passionate and as sincere as possible so that I'm giving them me rather than, you know, clouding it with my ego, really. I guess that's the answer. Yeah.
Nice. This is a nice closing of all the interview. Thank you so much for taking